Hi, I'm Steve Warneke, a retired Denver police sergeant with 15 years of experience in law enforcement. Nowadays, I'm a writer, researcher, and police expert. My hope here today is to give you some insight and a new perspective into the lives of many of America's police officers. It's not to leave you feeling afterwards like that Sarah McLachlan video with all of the mistreated animals depressed half to death. I'm opening a much-needed dialogue about the health and wellness of our law enforcement officers. So at 42 years old, I've only recently learned the true meaning of empathy. I thought empathy was trying to understand the experience of what someone else was going through. In her book, Dare to Lead, Dr. Brené Brown teaches that empathy isn't really about connecting with someone else's experience. It's more about connecting with someone's feelings. And that's what I'm asking from you today, is to try your best with an open mind and heart to connect to how it would feel to experience the emotions that I'm going to describe as I walk you through the everyday experiences of many of our police officers. Because despite the fact that our storylines are different, storylines being what's happening in our individual lives that's bringing up certain emotions, we all know what it's like to experience pain, sadness, or rejection. In other words, the experience of sadness is something we can all relate to regardless of what's happened. Now, let's imagine for a moment that for 40+ hours a week, your job is to respond to all of the awful things that have happened in your community. Imagine you respond to a house after it's been broken into. You tour around the residence with the homeowner as they discover item upon item that's been taken from them. You watch them sob when they find out their mother's wedding ring, which has been in the family for generations, now stolen. You watch as they attempt to process how it is they are going to deal with no longer feeling safe in their own home. Imagine you're dispatched to call after call of people who've had their cars stolen or broken into, cars which were left running, valuables left in plain sight, or sometimes none of the above, just rotten luck. Imagine, each night in America, hundreds of thousands of couples are having a wonderful, loving evening, snuggled up in each other's arms, but you talk to none of those couples. The couples you meet are fighting. Often one of them has physically hurt the other, sometimes very badly. Imagine all the millions of babysitting jobs every day that are handled without a hitch, yet the one you went to ended up when the nanny put a pillow over the baby's face to stop her from crying, and now the helpless child is dead. Imagine all of the people on romantic dates anywhere in the country on any given night, some promising, others maybe not so, yet the date you respond to ended up with a woman being held against her will and raped after she tried to say no. Imagine covering the ambulance on tons of different accidents. Someone has fallen from a ladder while putting up Christmas lights. Another man had a 7-inch shard of wood shoot back from a table saw and stick in his eye. Other people were just going to the store when they were hit by a drunk driver and paralyzed for life. Day after day, you see people who were hit by trains, buses, or cars while just going about their day. Most every person you talk to over and over has been victimized in some way. They were impersonated, assaulted, robbed, stabbed, or shot. Now, what effect do you think all of these emotional, usually graphic, and negative experiences would have on you as a police officer after a year, after 5 years, after 10 years or more? How would this change you as a person? Do you think over time this exposure would cause you to believe that the likelihood that your regular daily activities will result in injury or death is far greater than it actually is? Well, it can. So I want you to imagine being anxious, overly vigilant, fearful, that whatever you're about to do could go wrong. I want you to imagine that the perceived probability of bad things happening is far greater than it actually is. I want you to imagine starting to distrust others, isolating yourself because you think it will protect you and keep you safe, and of course, reduce the anxiety that you are now constantly feeling. I want you to imagine that then leads to depression. In really bad cases, what if you turned to alcohol, drugs, or had thoughts or attempts of suicide? 2018 marks the second straight year in a row where police suicides outnumber line of duty deaths, according to data from the Blue Help and Officer Down Memorial page. 140 police officers and 103 firefighters committed suicide, whereas 129 officers and 93 firefighters died in the line of duty, whether in an accident or at the hands of another. There's not a lot of dialogue about these issues, and there's several obstacles involved here that are hampering the discussion. So, I want you to imagine experiencing these feelings and symptoms and now not being able to talk about it. And why wouldn't you be able to talk about it? So first, many police officers are worried that asking for help could trigger a cycle where they are reevaluated as to their fitness for duty. They worry they could end up suspended, fired, or on special assignment, often referred to amongst cops as the rubber gun squad. They then have no ability to return to their regular assignment. The bottom line is, would you be willing to risk your livelihood and the security you provide for your family to ask for help? There's also a stigma around depression and mental health issues. And yet another problem hampering this discussion is the perception, and maybe even the truth, that many in the public, media, and even their own department don't believe they're supported. My research shows 90% of all cops feel the media is against them. 94% feel the public does not understand the job of police officer. 52% of respondents to me believe their department does not support them. And perhaps worst of all, 53% feel that they cannot talk to their own family about their work. So, these feelings of hypervigilance, paranoia, antisocial behavior, distrust, anxiety, depression, and so forth are happening, and yet many feel they need to handle this on their own, but they aren't all equipped to handle it. So psychologically, what is happening inside the minds of our police officers? Certainly, some are affected by PTSD. PTSD can result after witnessing or experiencing a terrifying event. There are many symptoms which could accompany PTSD: intrusive memories, avoidance, negative changes in thinking and mood, and changes in physical and emotional reactions. PTSD is certainly an issue for law enforcement, and in particular those who have been through or witnessed a critical incident. In fact, PTSD in first responders is 5 times more frequent than in the level of civilians. Yet there's very little being done to address this, and again, very little dialogue about it. Another issue, also with little discussion, is what I've called law enforcement distress syndrome, or LEDS. Unlike PTSD, which results from witnessing or experiencing one traumatic event, LEDS has a slow onset after responding day after day to multiple traumatic events. I believe LEDS is having a disparaging impact on the quality of life and wellness of some of our law enforcement officers. LEDS at its core is experiencing and witnessing day after day violence, victimization, hurt, loss, pain, gore, and death. And that slowly convinces you that the likelihood of these things happening in general is much higher than it actually is. Symptoms of LEDS include hypervigilance, revenge or vengeance paranoia, antisocial behavior, distrust of others and motivations, chronic fear caused by fatalistic thinking, adrenaline addiction, depression and suicidal thoughts, and in some cases, alcohol or substance abuse issues. To read more about LEDS, head to my website at www.stevewarneke.com. So far, my research has only included former and current law enforcement, but this may very well extend to all first responders. For now, let me share with you some excerpts from some of the people who have contacted me in what has been an overwhelming response to my writing and research. One person writes to me, "I feel like I'm stuck in a maze and cannot find my way out to figure out who I am supposed to be now." Another writes that after she saw a coworker murdered, she had to get out of the job. She said, "LEDS describes my daily life to a T." Another former officer wrote, "You put into words exactly what I have been going through." He ended his note by saying, "I'm 50 now and it's getting worse as I age." And even some who've contacted me are experiencing more severe symptoms of LEDS. One person writes to me, I have exiled myself from most of my lifelong friends and even family members, outside wife and children. I have about a 30-minute limit to comfort even in family gatherings, which will result in me having to leave or seclude myself if at home during any gathering. Here's another officer's email to me. As well as not wanting to ever go out in public while off, when I'm home and it's time to go to bed, I check the door several times, always make sure my gun and myself are positioned properly to defend a home invasion. Any unknown noise and I'm up clearing the house. And if my 7-year-old son sleeps in it all, I go into his room and check to make sure he's breathing. I've seen so much death and evil, my mind always goes to the worst possible outcome. The ultimate goal of my research is to try to find prevention, management, and treatment for those whose quality of life is affected by the mental ramifications of doing their job. A job, which I might add, that is brave and selfless. Without the dedication of these brave men and women, our way of life as we know it would not be possible. We've seen examples of just how close the country is to being terrorized by the small minority of criminals and anarchists who would wreak havoc at the first opportunity. This is why it's so important for us, the silent majority, to reach out and help the men and women who protect us. I want to leave today on a positive note. The first step in making progress to help improve the quality of life of our first responders is to get the media and the general public to start this process of connecting with the feelings that law enforcement is experiencing. To our first responders, there is hope for those of you struggling. For the almost 47% of you I surveyed who said that you feel more depressed since becoming a police officer. I've been approached by and found several potential methods of management and treatment since beginning my work. In addition to the traditional counseling and mental health work, there are now ministries dedicated to helping cops. There are nonprofits that are starting up dedicated to the mental health of law enforcement so that cops aren't in the next hospital bed to the person they just dealt with at work. There are support groups, mindfulness practices one Oregon lieutenant is teaching, and of course, the one I'm most excited about as a dog lover is the potential to use service animals. Former and current law enforcement, I still need your help. If you haven't already, please take my 15-minute survey at stevewarneke.com. For the mass public, your police officers need your love and support. Beginning to connect with empathy is that first step. Your openness and compassion will speak volumes. Learning more about their job is important as well. I'll teach you that in my book, From Boy to Blue, which is available at stevewarneke.com. A percentage of the proceeds is funding my research and efforts. Thank you so much for your attention, time, and support. We'll see you next time.